You're listening to Crushing Classical, How to Thrive in Your Creative Career. I'm your host, Jennet Ingle, oboist, entrepreneur, author, and business and creative coach for musicians. On today's podcast, you'll hear my interview with Leslie Tagorda, brand astrologer, designer, podcast host, and professional clarinetist. The story of how she created and evolved her business is so inspiring to me, and I know it will be to you as well. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the show. Leslie Tagorda helps spiritual entrepreneurs become the luminary leaders they were born to be. As a multiracial brand astrologer, designer, podcast host, and author, Leslie revealed her calling when a crisis in her business identity led her to her natal chart, where the AstroBrand method revealed itself, combining business astrology, branding, and leadership. Today, she teaches this method to visionary entrepreneurs and changemakers globally to help them affirm, embrace, and amplify their star-powered purpose. You know, in my book, The Happiest Musician, I talk about getting clear on what you want. I talk about knowing what you need to thrive and finding ways to create that in your own life. I talk about just starting and letting things evolve instead of feeling like you have to have your whole business planned out in advance. I want to make it possible for creatives to rise. In this conversation with Leslie, I was so struck by how she embodied all of those ideas and how the more she leaned into the creative topics and projects that excited her, the more successful she became. It was really magical to hear how the threads of her life came together to create what she has now. So I really want you to listen for that. Another thing I talk about in the book is my own privilege as a white woman and how I know it's helped me to progress. Leslie shares her own perspective on this, and it's powerful and important to hear. I can know intellectually that privilege exists and still be shocked to hear what it's like for someone who doesn't have it. She and I attended the same excellent conservatory, are equivalently talented, and had very different experiences. I'm really grateful to her for bringing this up. I know that you will love this interview. Thanks for listening. If you spend more than a few minutes a month on billing and scheduling for your teaching studio, you might consider Fonz. It's an all-in-one platform to help service-based businesses, like music teachers. In fact, it was originally created by a music teacher to manage their clients and their billing without stress and hassle. It helps you to up-level your presence and show up to your clients and students as the professional you are. You can get a free 2-week trial with the link in the show notes. Leslie Tagorda, welcome to Crushing Classical. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been so excited to speak with you and catch up and share all the things.
Exactly. Leslie, I remember being freshmen together in the dormitory at the Eastman School of Music. And then I remember from a few years ago, suddenly you popped into visibility again in my life with your amazing AstroBranding business.
Yes.
And I am itching to talk about all of that because I love what you're doing. And can I just sort of start by asking your podcast and your Facebook group, they're called The Savvy Luminary. And that is such a beautiful and evocative phrase. What do you mean by that, Leslie?
The savvy luminary. Well, a luminary is one that emits light, one that is known in their field. And I believe that we are all luminaries. And how can we become savvy and work with impact and work with ease? Well, we're used to doing a lot of strengths finders or personality tests. Well, astrology is your ultimate personality test because you can't fudge those questions.
Nope, the stars just tell you.
Yes, the stars give you a blueprint of the energies that you have available to play with in your life and in your work. And it can be an actually pragmatic and strategic tool in just crafting your best life and your best work. And so the Savvy Luminary was kind of a creation of putting all my favorite things and my love of moon things together to share how to use your astrology in your work.
That is incredible, and I love that you talked about just putting all of your favorite things together in your own business, like in your own work, and creating a career and a life out of that. So what is it that, how can you talk about like what you do in your business, what you do
Yeah.
in your company?
Well, in my business right now, I teach astrology and I have astrology groups, mostly for entrepreneurs or change makers. And I've been expanding outside of just the entrepreneurial circle because what I've noticed is that people crave this insight and this working with our natal, our innate natural energies and strengths. And so, what really excites me is that kind of social collective aspect and social impact, and how people want to make change, how people want to see themselves as a leader, even if they might not ever been taught that they were a leader. And so, for the musicians here that are listening, y'all are leaders. You are crafting your own careers, crafting your own lives. And so in my business, it's just been this kind of evolution of collecting all of these different skill sets, all of these different careers to kind of get me to where I am now and wanting to share, teach, guide people. So doing a lot of astrology teaching on my podcast, on my website, in groups and communities, but then also doing a lot of one-on-one insight work on how people can shift their businesses and shift their work lives to actually work for them. So I love it.
I love that. And you're exactly right. Classical musicians especially are not trained to think of themselves as leaders,
No.
even when they're like sitting in principal roles, sitting in leadership positions. There's so much about being a classical musician that is about sort of following, sort of trying to apply to gatekeepers for permission, trying to join these institutions that are like the ways we've been taught to consider, the ways we've been taught to see success.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And I think having lived through a lot of the kind of systemic things in classical music that are shifting, there's still a lot of work to do in that, but has really kind of led me on this path of finding your own path, that there are many different paths. And, if somebody went through conservatory and were trained to, I think for the younger musicians, this is not the case anymore. There's a lot of business development and career development in music conservatories. But at least when we were going back to school, that freshman year, dare I say how many
Mm-hmm.
decades ago that was?
Let's not talk about
Okay.
that.
Good. Back in our days, there was only one career track, right? We all went to school with the hopes of landing that job, that unicorn pie in the sky job that some of us did achieve. And of those people that did achieve it, are they truly happy in those positions, or are they burnt to a crisp? And so no matter where you're in your career, whether it's a musician or, having another business, or like how you and I have these hybrids, right? We have our businesses to support our music habits,
Mm-hmm.
that we still do at a very high caliber. There's this idea that you get to choose what you love and what you're really good at, instead of just like, hustling and grinding. Like, that is not sustainable.
Exactly true. And the fact that every musician I know is this beautiful amalgamation of different interests and different talents and strengths. And all of the musicians I know, of course, are high level musicians who are performing
Yeah.
in high level groups, just like you and I do.
Yeah.
But no, none of them are exclusively their instrument.
No.
right? That's not even a thing, and yet that is 100% what we were trained to, how I was trained to consider myself.
Yeah, same
So,
here.
yeah, so Leslie, what as you were training to be a professional clarinet player and as you were like out in the world looking for that, like where how did that take you? Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of your classical music
My
career and
long journey.
yeah, exactly. Can you talk about like
Yeah.
how you got from there to here?
Well, I would love to start with like right here. Like I was
Yeah.
rushing home from a morning gig to get back to my office, my little nook to get to my mic to chat with you. Because my primary music career right now is playing in my nationally touring quintet. So
Mm-hmm.
I play in a woodwind quintet that we specialize only in music by Latin American composers called Quinteto Latino. And we have a pretty good following on just kind of on the national stage. Um, and strangely enough, I am not a Latina. I am from Hawaii and I'm of mixed heritage. But going back to, when we first met in those halls, working on our reads and talking about learning all new skills, at least for me, it was after that conservatory experience, I was like, I was really burned out. I did not have a good time at conservatory. I think just like the whole experience, the whole culture, that I wasn't really aware of the culture that I was
Mm-hmm.
swimming in, that I needed to like go all the way back home to Hawaii to defrost essentially and
To defrost
recover.
from Rochester, for
Oh,
sure. But yes, of course,
yes.
I
And from
I get your
also like
metaphor.
the freezer burn.
Yeah.
So in Hawaii, I was able to get my master's degree, and Hawaii has this very amazing history and legacy of bands that comes from the royalty back when there was a royalty in Hawaii. They would create these like kind of Belgian and like German bands. So there's like this giant tradition of bands in Hawaii, and that's why there's like so many great classical musicians that come from Hawaii, because there's like this huge band tradition. And so I was playing in the Royal Hawaiian Band for about 2 or 3 years while I started figuring out what to do. And I had this beautiful music studio and I had all these like wonderful students. And I was just like, oh my gosh, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? Teaching clarinet and playing in this band wearing a white muumuu. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, no. And so at the time, my mom was like, why don't you move to the mainland? It was like during the .com era. And they're like, they're giving jobs to anybody that has master's degrees. And by this time I had picked up a master's degree in music. And so I was like, okay, bye-bye clarinet. I'm not going to play you. And I hopped on a plane with like $200 in my bank account. And I moved to San Francisco to jump on the .com bandwagon.
That is so much courage right there, and like okay, I love the story so far, and I'll just highlight that plenty of musicians find themselves in that same position, right? They've
Yeah.
like focused and worked, and now they're like having some success. They're performing professionally, and they're teaching, and they've got their music thing, and like it's all sort of working.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, so this now is the thing that I'm going to do forever. And
You like live in that for a couple of years. You're like, oh my gosh, what did I get stuck in it? What stuck into?
mm-hmm. Exactly. It's amazing and it's also a little bit limiting. So terrific, fantastic. So here you are
Yeah.
in San Francisco with
So San
$200.
Francisco. So another little backstory that I just want to add, because all these little pieces make sense. So remember back at like Sibley Music Library, and like this is really like the internet had not just been invented, but just had come into public use. And there were two computers at Sibley Music Library that were connected to the internet. I don't know if you remember this, but I worked at the library. So I was like very intimate with these computers. And I would go onto these computers and visit these different web pages going, wow, wouldn't it be so cool to design a web page? Like who makes these things? And so when I went to San Francisco and like everything was about the web, I was like, I'm going to design web pages. I'm going to find a tech job. I'm going to do this because I thought this was cool. And I went to some headhunters and they're like, oh, you're just a musician. And they kept on sending me to all these admin jobs, like at hospital administration. I'm like, are you not listening to me? I want a tech job. The courageousness of the early 20s.
Sure, sure.
Right.
With your master's degree in clarinet, and like, of course, you can have a web design job in the during the dot-com boom.
Yes,
Sure.
with no skills, because I just had learned how to attach an attachment to an email at the time.
It's a steep learning curve for us. We like came of
Yes.
age before the internet.
Yes, but
Attachments are hard. Okay, go on.
attachments were hard, and but it was so beautiful, and I loved technology. I was just like, oh, I wish I had more of this. And so eventually I landed in a job that we were doing training, delivering training to India and doing tech support. It was this dream job. I was doing tech support for a bunch of different companies and having to create web pages to deliver training. And so within the span of a year, I picked up so many different skills. And then .com crashed and I got laid off. And I went eking out a couple of more like corporate tech jobs. And then I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm stuck in a cubicle. I hate cubicles. I hate fluorescent light. Why am I here? And at this time, I started missing the clarinet. And so I'd been picking up like these community band things and sitting in community bands and with all of our training and just the way that we were playing, I was like, this sucks. Not that I didn't enjoy the community band, but when you're playing at a certain level and you have to drop down, it's very, very uncomfortable.
100%. There is a joy to a community band, and I love it and I support it. And so many of my students are like passionate parts
Yes.
of their community bands. And
Yes.
it's not for me because
It's not for me.
Mhm.
You're right. It was just, I couldn't play in that. And so I started like poking around at the different kind of like how I describe it as kind of like in baseball, you have your minor leagues and you have your major leagues. And so there
Mhm.
was a lot of minor league orchestras and a lot of minor league musicians and like poking around with the different like contractors and poking around with, like, oh, should I study clarinet again? Why not? So I'm going to go straight to the top. So I'm going to go study with the principal clarinetist of San Francisco Symphony. So I just went straight to the top and started taking lessons again, just to kind of get my name in there. And then before you knew it, I was back in the game playing in kind of the freelance orchestras and like
Yes.
doing a lot of freelance. And it was really great for a long, long time. But I live in the Bay Area. And so there's this wide network of freelance orchestras, like over, like 4 hour driving distance.
Mhm.
And so I found myself driving a lot. And to be able to support that, I was like, I didn't want to teach. I had already quit my cubicle land job. And I was like, I have to do something. I'm going to start a web design business.
Sure.
Why not?
Yeah.
So I knew that I could travel to Modesto, stay in the hotel, work on my business during the middle of the day, and then go to rehearsals that night and practice and do what I needed to do. And I did that for probably about 10 years and really, really enjoyed it. And I got to play with like the San Francisco Opera and the San Francisco Ballet. And then I had this quintet where we'd really be advocating. And so I had this really 50-50 life of like my business and my music so that I could survive in a very expensive place like San Francisco.
And I love the part where you're like making your doing the music thing and you're playing in the high level orchestras and groups that you want to be playing in. You've got this quintet, which is already inherently a little bit entrepreneurial. But
Yes.
in order to make the life that you wanted work, you had to start your own business so that you could set your own hours, so that you could do it on your own time, so that you could like find something that made everything else fit and take care of the money and take care of the music making and like feed your creativity the whole way. And
Yeah.
like to you and me, this feels like such a natural next step. Like you say it so casually. So I decided to start my own business, but this is a big step for a lot of people, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of like figuring stuff out and willingness to just put yourself out there and figure it out. So
Yeah.
that's not easy. I just wanted to celebrate that for a moment and take a moment and say, was there any part of you that was like, who am I to start a business? Or was it just like totally natural for you?
I think it was definitely totally natural for me, right? Because even back in Hawaii, when you have your music studio, you're running a business. You got to get the students, you got to make sure that they're achieving their goals, you're setting up recitals, you're talking with parents, you're creating contracts, you're already in business
Yes.
for yourself. And some people have called me impulsive. But thank you for celebrating that with me. Because that impulsivity is just this kind of not blind, it's trust. It's trust in myself to swim, to not sink.
Yes. Beautiful.
And I feel that, working with my clients now, often diving into some of these coaching things, people are like, well, I want a guarantee. Isn't my astrology going to give me a guarantee of this kind of business that I'm going to start? And I'm like, honey, nothing is a guarantee.
Right.
Nothing in our life is a guarantee. And so you jump in, you adapt. If you like it, keep swimming. If you don't like it, get out. Make a change.
Because it's all experiments.
It's
It's all experiments.
Yeah. Just like when you're in music, right? If you make a mistake, you're not going to like stop the whole orchestra to go pick up that note. You're going to just like keep on going or do an improv, get back into the seat. And I think, for musicians, like we have to remember that we are very adaptable. We are so talented that you can do anything that you want to do. And so if it is starting a business, getting past that fear, that need to control, which, okay, I hear you, a little bit hard for some of us musicians.
Yes.
To let go of control. But, have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So now you're in Modesto and you're like running your web design business from the hotel and playing the gig at night.
Yes. And then, of course, being impulsive, Leslie, I get bored. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Tired of being in the car all the time. I'm tired of making, like pennies to the dollar. And I'm like, there has to be a different way. And at the time, my parents were still living in Hawaii. And because I'd built this, I guess what people call now the laptop lifestyle, my dad was chronically ill. And I decided that I was going to go home for a few months to take care of him and do that thing. But surprises, life throws you surprises. And my dad did pass away, but at that time that he passed away, I also got pregnant. And it was just this very kismet, synchronistic kind of event. And I wasn't planning on having a child. And I was already, quite, mature. And there's nothing like having a child that rearranges your priorities and focus. And this is when I decided that I just couldn't play in those freelance gigs anymore. Like I couldn't justify being hours on the road when my child was at home, paying for childcare, putting that responsibility on my partner. Yeah. Like it got really focused. And even my web design business, I was just like, I was getting, again, burned out with just running the day-to-day, the drag of running on the business. And what ended up happening, so I had my son, I was already burnt out, I was tired like a new parent is, and my business was doing its thing, but none of my clients were like thriving. They weren't just doing this like amazing thing. Like our websites were taking years, I kid you not, years to finish, not because I wasn't delivering the product, but because my clients didn't know what they wanted. And they were having this kind of wishy-washy and just kind of in this stuck place. And I was like, what is going on? And so this is, again, kismet. It's just like when you're ready to pivot, if you're listening and watching and observing the signs, they all start presenting themselves. And I picked up this book and it was about branding, because in web design, you learn how to write for the web, you learn how to like do visual brands. It's a whole amalgamation, again, of different skills that you put together. So I was reading this book on branding, and this branding professionals were saying, you need one brand archetype for your business. And you like lean into this brand archetype. And I was reading the 12 archetypes and I was like, these 12 archetypes, they had different names, but I was like, these are just astrological archetypes. And this is where it gets interesting, because nobody knew this yet, but I had always been in the closet about my woo woo ness and my love of astrology.
Uh-huh.
One of the reasons why I went to Eastman was because I was a double major for a little bit in astronomy, because I didn't know you could be an astrologer. It was very random. Again, picking up all the skills that I needed.
Yes, yes.
And I went to my astrology chart, and I've been a lifelong learner of astrology. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. Okay, so these archetypes, that this branding archetypes, this relates to all these astrology archetypes. But I had already known so much about branding and web design. When I looked at my chart, I was like, oh, this is your planet for communications. This is your planet for confidence. This is your planet to exceed your expectations. This is your planet for focus and mastery. This is your planet for overcoming your wounds and stretching in your potential and change. And I was like, I have a map here of a business and a brand. And it was just like, instantaneously all of the dominoes started to like arrange themselves and organize themselves. um Within like a year, I had a completely different business. Like, we were still doing web design and branding, but now from this astrological perspective, which
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden just ignited just the work. Like, people were like, yes, that's it. Yes, that's what I want. There was no guessing. There was no comparing. There's no comparison when we started to use astrology. And so I've only started using astrology in my business over since 2018. So it's been about 5 years. And my life, myself, my powers, my business is drastically different since I started tapping into my natal powers.
That's incredible. And that I'm the thing that I'm hearing is like at the moment when you found the way to connect the passion that you had over here for the woo and the
Mm-hmm.
passion that you had over here for like the skills that you had over here for like
Yeah.
building the websites for creating things, suddenly the suddenly because you were so beautifully aligned, because you understood what you were doing and talking about and saying, like your clients stopped being wishy-washy, your clients stopped being disappointing. Like
Yeah.
you were pulling people to you who were like ready to
Yes.
take action and to be decisive and to be the clients you needed them to be.
Ooh, you're so good. Yes.
Ah, and because here's the thing, like the thing that's exciting, I don't understand nothing about the astrology, right? Like I have my own woo side,
Uh-huh.
but this thing where suddenly everything came together, suddenly the connections were made in your own head, and then people started coming to you, and then
Yeah.
like the business blew up. Like this, I've seen this before. This is when finally we find the when finally we find our own strengths and superpowers and we're able to
Mhm.
lean into them and be public about them. Like
Yeah.
that's when the magic happens.
Yeah.
In my business, in my read business, which like is not necessarily a creative enterprise,
It
the
is.
moment it blew up is when I started making videos about my process and videos about, and the reason that I started making the videos, look, I'm making this all about me.
No.
When I started making the videos because it was interesting to me and fun to me to like try to put words on the thing that I intuitively understood, right? I knew how to make the reads, but trying to communicate that interestingly and helpfully to people was such an interesting challenge for me, and that activity felt so aligned that suddenly it drew people to back to my business and to
Yeah.
my channel and like blew up my business in a good way. And what is my point? My point is this like aha moment of connecting the passion that you have here and the skill that you have here suddenly made it all come together for you. And I just wanted
Yeah.
to celebrate that too. I think it's amazing. And this exists for everyone. Musicians
For
are,
everyone.
you said this already, musicians are adaptable. They have so many skills, so many strengths in being able to like listen to a big picture complicated thing happening and also act in real time
Yeah.
in micro ways
Oh, yeah.
reacting to the phrases that other people are throwing, reacting to intonation, reacting to the visual of the conductor, reacting to the sound around them.
Oh my gosh.
All of it
Yes.
happens in real time, instantaneously. Like, this is such a skill, and we have no idea. Musicians have no idea how powerful they are sometimes.
So powerful. I'm so glad that you brought that up because, like, for just to reflect back and celebrating you, right? When you found your process, that creative process, and sharing what you do and really reflecting back on what comes so intuitively to you to share that, we forget that reflection process a lot, especially when things come naturally to us. But
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what we have to get curious with and explore and create opportunities that allow us to amplify those things that we're already good at. And
Yes.
astrology helps us uncover those things. And then going back to that adaptability, right? Playing the clarinet, playing second clarinet, play, like, oh my gosh, we're always doing the acrobatics.
Of
And
course.
so if you're a musician and you're able to respond to these micro intonations and fluctuations and pauses, and like, you already have all of the skill set that you need to be a business owner, to be an entrepreneur, to take not control, to claim your own destiny and go where you want.
Yes. Yes. It's just like finding that spark and being ready to put your passions and your skills
Yeah.
together, because it's so powerful, and you're living proof of that right now.
Well, one of the things I wanted to add, right, and we both kind of mentioned this, that it took us a little while to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people who find it really soon, like they find it at 19, they find it at 20, they find it really early in their life. And then there's somebody like me who finds it like well into their adulthood. But it's not time wasted, and it's never too late, because as I explained my long trajectory in my career, I needed all these skills. Like, I even still need music, because when I'm looking at a natal chart, so for those of us that might not know, a natal chart is essentially a map of the solar system from the Earth's point of view at the time and place of your first breath. So I believe, and whether or not listeners here believe, I believe that our soul chose this time and place, and the energies and the geometry of how the planets have relationships are
Mm-hmm.
imprinted on your soul. And it's your soul and your life's obligation to map out how you want to use these energies, because they happen in a spectrum. So there's no such thing as a bad arrangement. Just like if you're playing poker, you can win with a really quote unquote bad hand, or you can totally lose a game with a really great hand. Right. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not about the cards that you're given, it's about how you strategically play those cards. And so
Yes.
your natal chart gives you your highest potentials. And for me, that kind of late blooming was because I needed to find my own confidence. And I don't think that this is a unique experience for me, a unique to me. I feel that a lot of us classical musicians, especially going through the conservatory and this very oppressive system of classical music, that confidence is like kind of beat out of you. And it took me a really long time to find my voice and to find my confidence, because the training that I personally had really held my voice back. Essentially, I didn't have the resources or the permission or the understanding of these different dynamics and the systems that I was living in until much later. And so now, through my business and even through my quintet, we are always advocating for change and equity in music, in the way we do business. Because also, like with businesses, when we think about a business, like one might go straight to Tesla or Amazon or Facebook. Hi, puppy. Puppy is agreeing. the system is broken. We might go straight to like, well, I'm not a business owner because I'm not Jeff Bezos. But you know what? We don't need Jeff Bezoses in this world. Like people like Jeff Bezos are unethical and a drain on this planet. And so if we think that we're supposed to be building businesses to replicate those styles of like consuming, then we're also doing it wrong.
Yes. We need so many more we need so many more voices
Yes.
in within classical music, within the arts, within our society, actually, right?
Yes.
We need so many more voices that are not just the few that are on top. And like you're right, I see it coming. I see it coming slowly.
Yes.
And it's really difficult. Like classical music has a very stuck in the past problem in
Yes.
general, and a very like this is the way you play the clarinet
Yes.
problem that goes long back. What I'm excited about your quintet. I was watching a few of your YouTube videos earlier today, and like you guys are so great. And so what
Thanks.
can you talk a little bit about how what you're doing with this quintet and how you are using it to like bring these voices forward more?
Yeah, so our the quintet that I play in is called Quinteto Latino, and it was founded by French hornist Armando Castellano. And one of the reasons why I love playing in this quintet so much is because of the mission of the quintet. And one of the stories that Armando shares is that when he was going through conservatory, he as a Mexican American man, he had never seen another French horn player who looked like him. He had never played any music except by any Mexican composers. He had never played, there was all of these, and he had only been in situations where he was like one of the only people of color in situations. And I resonated so deeply with that, even though my heritage is, I'm from Hawaii, but I'm half Filipino. The Philippines and Mexico have a long history and some shared culture because of, the Spanish colonialism. So part of our quintet's mission is to advocate and celebrate music by Latin American composers, Latinx composers, which there is the Latin American classical music goes all the way back to the 1500s. It goes all the way back to Baroque Mexican music. There is Baroque Mexican music.
Why don't I know this? Why didn't I know that?
Well, it's by design that
Mm-hmm.
we don't know a lot of these things. And so our quintet really celebrates that and encourages Latin American composers. And then we have a seminario. The quintet was really inspired by the work of the Imani Quintet,
Mm-hmm.
the African American quintet, and they were composing their own music and they were creating their own sound. And so we are kind of modeled after that. And so now we have advocacy programs where Armando is teaching orchestras and different presenters. Like even we're really highly involved with Chamber Music America on how to bring more diversity and equity and inclusion into those programs. And there's a lot of pushback. There is so much pushback.
That's
And
astonishing to hear, actually. Like,
oh
and
yes.
I don't know why I'm surprised. Um, it's because I don't see it from where I sit, right? Because from
Yeah.
where I sit, like here in South Bend, Indiana, my orchestra is passionately attempting to bring in increasing DEI initiatives, like
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
trying to reach new audiences, trying to be advocates, trying to
Mm-hmm.
do these things. And like it's not I'm not going to like put us on a pedestal as like doing anything particularly
Yeah.
special, but like an effort that I see from my side. So like I am appalled that
Yeah.
you get pushback on just the basic idea that everyone's voice should be heard and that Latinx composers are worth celebrating and that this is an important mission.
Yeah, so how this shows up, how these like you probably have heard the term like microaggressions, right? Like how these microaggressions show up, for example, in chamber music, getting like having a presenter hire a woodwind quintet is already one challenge because we're not a string quartet and we don't have a piano. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's already like the number one
Strike one.
challenge, strike one. And then number two, then we're playing music that isn't written by composers that are familiar, AKA dead. And things like that. So there's pushback, right? So even just having jazz being considered a chamber music art form is fairly new. And then in the orchestra field, and I personally see chamber music as being kind of the future of classical music. It's much more nimble, like you can have better decisions. You can you have more voice in how you want the direction. Orchestras, they're always going to be big orchestras. Now, the smaller orchestras, they're having a really hard time because they can't get the audiences. However, they haven't really done the right work to attract audiences. And what I mean by this is like, oh, great, we're going to play a bunch of Marquez pieces. Like Marquez wrote a bunch of beautiful orchestral pieces, and we're going to do this for Cinco de Mayo, and we're going to serve margaritas.
I'm giggling.
We've all experienced that.
Yes, we have.
And that's one of the things that why do we have to celebrate these like amazing composers like Marquez when on only this like one Cinco de Mayo day, which is not even it's an American crafted holiday.
Yes. Why do we only do Black composers in February? Why do we only do women composers? Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so that's part of the bigger narrative and what we're trying to bring light to. And then, there's older board members who only know the past traditions are like, what's wrong with us serving margaritas on Cinco de Mayo and like playing La Cucaracha? And, it's like, okay, we're in that role again of educating and going back. And so in our quintet, we value playing a lot of educationals. And while as like a really like a high level classical musician, one might resent going to schools and playing for young children because you might believe that this is beneath you. But in fact, the relationship that you start with a kindergartner, a first grader, a second grader is a lasting relationship. Who do you think is going to be at those audiences to your concerts in 20 years if you don't establish a relationship at that young age? So it is not beneath you to share your excitement of your music and your instrument with a young child. And so part of our advocacy and education is our quintet makes it part of our mission to go to schools that maybe don't have the best music programs or have a lot of children of color or like more marginalized communities. And we bring this high caliber music to them to start to expand this idea of like, hey, what is classical music and who gets to listen to classical music? And so we're doing some really grassroots advocacy in that area.
Yes, getting out in the school and showing that, like, first of all, here is classical music in your school, and it is not boring.
Yes.
Because these are like 5 vibrant human beings who are showing up in front of you, who look like you in some cases, who are playing music by like composers whose names sound culturally familiar to you. Like, it's so important. It's so important.
And I know that people can't see me, but if you can imagine, like I have brown skin, I'm, a little bit larger than your average size person. And so simply me being on stage is already making a statement. I don't have to play my clarinet. I don't have to say anything. That somebody that looks like me can be doing this makes this profound impact on youth.
That is both so inspiring to hear and so, like, in a way really deeply discouraging too. Like, I sort of hate for you that the mere act of being on stage is so radical and so important. Like, I think I'm saying this wrong, but
It shouldn't have to be that way.
it shouldn't have to
Yeah.
be that way, is what I'm trying to say.
hmm And I completely understand that, and it's that world that we live in. Part of the seminario program that we have every other year is that we bring in musicians of color and guide them, yes, on music making, but helping navigate what it means to be a musician of color in the orchestral, the classical, chamber music world. And, the stories that I hear so often from some of the young musicians that have just come out of conservatory, I'm like, oh, so how many times has your picture shown up in the flyer? They're like, every single time. And I said, well, that's great. I was like, let's celebrate that, because you're getting visibility and you're helping show that this organization, this institution is trying to expand their diverse voices. Because when I was going to university, I was all but hidden.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to go on tour. I wasn't allowed to do certain things, and just kind of giving like little peace prizes for things that really destroyed me, because it, like back in when we were going to conservatory, we were still upholding this very like homogenous narrative of what it was to be a classical musician, and classical musicians did not look like me.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a big hurtful event in our senior year, but I won't go into that. But looking back on it now, at the time that I was experiencing it, I had no idea what was going on. I just couldn't fathom, and I placed all the blame on myself.
Of course.
Now that I look back on it, I was like, there was something deeper going on that was never reconciled.
Again, that is astonishing for me to hear, because like I didn't see it and wouldn't have at that time. Like it wasn't something...
I didn't see it either.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Not to bring the conversation down, but it's just that this is what happens in classical music, that we are all here making change because we love this music so much, and that we want this music to not go extinct.
Yes, because classical music is a living art, and living things evolve.
Yes.
And change. And like, thank you for being a part of that evolution, and for like forcing that evolution in some ways to be happening. It's so important. It's so honorable. And like I love this conversation because it's so inspiring, like on every level. First of all, the advocacy that you're sharing with your quintet, and simply by being you, and like also if we can spin it back to the entrepreneurial side, like the things that you are creating, y'all podcast listeners should make sure that you're checking out Leslie's website and socials and information, which will be in the show notes for sure, because it's gorgeous stuff that she is doing. And this is possible. All of the things that we're talking about are possible for musicians in general. Like I'm seeing you like glowing on your side of our Zoom screen right now.
It's hot in California.
Well, I meant that more metaphorically.
Thank you.
And thriving in like this really powerful voice that you have, and this powerful business that you run, and this you're a luminary, right? You're a savvy luminary yourself, sitting there and doing what you do. And so like I honor everything that you have been creating and that we've talked about. Leslie, how can tell us where people can find you, and how they can work with you, or how you would like them to get in touch?
Oh, thank you for asking. I have, there's so many places. Where is the best place to find me? If you want to take a listen to my podcast, which I'm on a little break right now, but I'll be coming back. It's called The Savvy Luminary. And that's astrology for entrepreneurs and changemakers. And then on Instagram is probably one of the places where I share the most information. And my Instagram handle is @NewMoonCreativeCO. Or you can always just look me up on the interwebs at Leslie Tagorda.
That is fabulous. I will have all of those in the show notes, of course.
Thank you.
And Leslie, thank you so much for being here and for talking with me today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. And may I offer one last thought to all the listeners here? May you reframe all of your past judgments and your past failures and your past people who told you that you couldn't into healing opportunities that just elevate you and lift you and push you forward because you love what you do so much.
Thank you, Leslie, for that gorgeous blessing for all of our listeners.
Thank you, Jennet, for having me. I'm just it was so lovely to reconnect with you like this.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe on your app of choice and leave a review too. It really helps us. Don't forget to check out Fawns if your own teaching or service-based business needs better systems, and use the link in the show notes for our special offer. Our theme music was composed by Dream Vance. You can hear his first album, Re-Entry, on Spotify and Apple Music, and follow him there for more innovative synthwave music. You can find me at jennetingle.com, which is also where you can pick up a copy of The Happiest Musician book, reach out to me with thoughts or questions about the podcast, or apply for a possibility session to explore your own portfolio career and thriving musical life. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.